My name is Adriana Lopez, and I'm 31 years old. For most of my life, I thought money was the glue that held my family together. I didn't realize until much later that it was actually the knife that cut us apart. If you've ever felt like your worth was measured only by what you could provide, then you'll understand my story. And before I go on, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It truly helps me continue sharing stories like mine, and I'd love for you to comment where you're watching from. I read every single one. Your support means more than you know. From the outside, people would have called us a successful family. My parents ran a small real estate business in Dallas, and they loved to flaunt the idea that we were doing better than most. Our house wasn't a mansion, but it was big enough to feel impressive, with a double-car garage and a swimming pool that sparkled in the Texas sun. I grew up believing that security was permanent, that comfort was earned, and that love followed naturally. But as I would come to learn, security fades, comfort breaks, and sometimes love is conditional. I was the oldest of 3 daughters, and for a long time, I carried the silent weight of being the one who was supposed to set the standard. My parents had high expectations of me, not because they wanted me to thrive, but because they wanted someone to show off at barbecues, family gatherings, and church events. Every test score, every award, every achievement was less about my effort and more about their chance to say, "Look at what we built." But here's the painful truth. They only celebrated me when those achievements could be attached to money. When I earned a scholarship to study finance at university, the pride wasn't in my persistence. It was in how much tuition they wouldn't have to pay. When I landed my first corporate job, the pride wasn't in my dedication. It was in the salary they could tell their friends about. My value was always a dollar amount. By the time I was 25, I was doing what everyone had quietly expected of me, carrying the family's image on my shoulders. I was working long hours in investment management, grinding through days and nights with the silent desperation to keep proving myself. My parents would call me their success story, but what they really meant was, "Adriana is our lifeline." Because whenever they wanted something extra, a new car, a home renovation, or a vacation, they didn't cut back on their own spending. They looked at me. And I, hungry for their approval, always gave in. I wish I could tell you that I stood up for myself then, but the truth is, I didn't. I equated money with love, so I gave and gave, thinking that maybe if I provided enough, they'd finally see me as more than a wallet with a heartbeat. But no matter how much I provided, the love never felt unconditional. Still, there was one thing I hadn't yet learned: how fragile money really is. In my late 20s, the market shifted hard. I had leveraged myself too thin, carrying not only my own responsibilities, but also a portion of my parents' debts. When a major investment went south, it was like dominoes falling. My savings collapsed, my credit lines stretched to breaking, and suddenly I wasn't the daughter to be paraded anymore. I was the daughter who had failed. That shift in their attitude was like whiplash. The same parents who once bragged about me started to treat me like a disgrace. They didn't see the years I had carried them, or the sacrifices I made so they could live comfortably. All they saw was that I no longer had money to give. Overnight, I went from being their pride to being their shame. Humiliation became my daily companion. At family gatherings, subtle remarks turned into pointed jabs. Cousins whispered, aunts raised eyebrows, and my parents didn't even bother defending me. They were the ones leading the chorus of shame. She used to be the one with everything, but look at her now. My failures were entertainment, and I was forced to smile through the burning in my chest.
It wasn't just emotional either. They treated me differently in practical ways. They excluded me from family decisions, as if my lack of money had stripped me of intelligence. They stopped asking about my opinions, my job, or my future. Even small things, like leaving my name out of holiday cards or forgetting to save me a seat at the table, became symbols of how disposable they thought I was without wealth. And yet, I kept replaying the same thoughts in my head. Maybe if I just rebuild, maybe if I just climb back up, they'll treat me with respect again. It was the same old trap. But rebuilding after you've lost everything isn't as simple as grit and determination. It requires grace, patience, and, Most painfully, it requires walking through the valley of being seen as nothing. The lowest point came one Thanksgiving when the entire family gathered at my parents' home. The air smelled of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes, but the warmth was skin deep. As we sat around the table, conversation turned to accomplishments, salaries, and homes purchased. My younger sister had just bought a new condo. My parents beamed. My cousin had landed a promotion. Applause. Then someone asked about me. I could feel the silence tighten around me like a noose. My mother answered for me with a cold laugh. Adriana doesn't have much to share these days. The table erupted in polite chuckles. My face burned, and for the first time, I didn't even try to hide my shame. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection until tears blurred my vision. In that moment, I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or even a person in their eyes. I was just a failure, an empty seat at a table where I no longer belonged. That night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't strength yet. It was survival. I knew I couldn't keep living for their approval. I knew I couldn't tie my worth to their shallow measures. And though I didn't realize it at the time, that was the night I began preparing for the moment when everything would turn. The moment when humiliation would give way to truth. Because while my family mocked me for being broke, what they didn't know was that I had quietly gathered evidence of something much bigger. Evidence that would change not only how they saw me, but how the world saw them. And when the time came, when they pushed me all the way into court, demanding what little I had left, I would be ready. With one document. One paper that would unravel every lie and make the police storm in. When people imagine losing money, they picture numbers disappearing from a screen, a simple subtraction of wealth. But when I lost everything, it wasn't just numbers. It was my dignity, my sense of safety, and the last fragile thread that tied me to my family's approval. The unraveling happened faster than I could have imagined. One miscalculated investment sent shockwaves through every corner of my life. The savings I had built since college evaporated. Credit card bills piled up like an avalanche. I sold my car, downsized my apartment, and began taking extra work just to cover the basics. For the first time since I was a teenager, I felt like I was standing on quicksand, every step dragging me deeper. But the hardest part wasn't the financial collapse. It was the way my family reacted to it. To them, my worth had always been measured by the money I provided. And now that I had nothing to give, I became nothing at all. My mother started answering relatives' questions about me with a dismissive wave of her hand. Adriana's figuring things out, she'd say, which really meant she's not worth talking about anymore. My father, once eager to brag about my promotions, avoided mentioning me entirely. At gatherings, I noticed how they looked at me with a quiet shame, as if my brokenness were contagious. The humiliation became suffocating. At my sister's birthday dinner, they passed the check around the table. I didn't have enough to contribute, so I stayed silent, hoping someone would cover me discreetly. Instead, my father announced loudly, "Well, Adriana can't pitch in these days." The table laughed awkwardly, and my sister avoided my eyes. I wanted to disappear into the floor.
Each remark was a dagger, each exclusion a reminder that in their eyes, I was no longer a daughter worth respecting. I wasn't the same Adriana they had once paraded around. I was reduced to an object lesson in failure, a cautionary tale whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. What hurt most was not just their words, but their abandonment. When I needed support the most, they withdrew. They had leaned on me for years, taken my generosity as if it were their right. But now, when my foundation cracked, they didn't offer a single hand to steady me. They turned their backs and let me drown. Yet even in those darkest nights, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my tiny one-bedroom apartment, something inside me hardened. Their humiliation had crushed me, but it had also revealed a truth I could no longer ignore. My family's love was conditional, and I would never earn it back with money. What they didn't know was that while they mocked me for being broke, I was already holding on to a secret, a document hidden in my desk drawer, evidence I hadn't fully realized the power of yet. One paper that would turn humiliation into justice. One paper that would make them finally face the truth. I thought the humiliation would end with whispers at family dinners and mocking comments slipped into conversations. I was wrong. My parents weren't satisfied with belittling me. They wanted to strip me bare in the eyes of the law. The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, tucked in a plain white envelope with the sharp weight of finality. It was a court summons. My parents had filed a case against me, claiming I owed them money for loans they said they had given me over the years. My hands trembled as I read the words, each line like a knife twisting deeper. They weren't just turning their backs on me. They were trying to destroy me. I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence, the paper shaking in my grip. For years I had been the one bailing them out, helping with mortgage payments, covering medical bills, even buying my sister's new clothes when my parents refused. I never kept receipts, never asked for repayment. I had believed that family didn't keep score, but now, in the stark ink of legal documents, my parents were rewriting history. They were painting me as someone who had stolen from them. The betrayal was heavier than the financial ruin. I could almost hear their voices in the courtroom, twisting the truth, pointing fingers, convincing everyone that I was nothing but a failure who lived off their generosity. They were building a story where I was the villain. At first, I felt paralyzed. What defense could I mount without proof? I had spent years sacrificing quietly, never asking for acknowledgement. And now that silence threatened to bury me alive. Nights blurred into mornings as I pored over old files, bank statements, and emails, desperately searching for anything to prove the truth. That was when I found it. Hidden among dusty folders was a document I had nearly forgotten about. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even more than a few pages, but it carried the weight of truth. It was evidence of transactions, clear records showing that I had been the one transferring money, not the other way around. Proof that my so-called debts were nothing more than lies. Even more shocking, attached to one of those transfers was a note my mother had written, thanking me for covering their overdue bills. In black and white, the truth lived. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of strength. My parents had dragged me into court thinking I had nothing left, thinking they could bury me under shame and lies. But they had underestimated me. I wasn't walking into that courtroom empty-handed. They wanted everything from me, but I had one paper that could turn the tide. One paper that could expose not only their hypocrisy but something darker. Something that might make more than just the judge take notice. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale air, the kind that clung to old buildings filled with secrets. I walked through the heavy doors that morning with my stomach knotted, each step echoing against the marble floors. For weeks, I had barely slept, replaying every possible outcome in my mind. My parents sat across the aisle, their posture stiff and self-righteous, as though they were saints who had come to deliver justice. I couldn't look at them for long. Seeing my mother's carefully pressed blouse and my father's smug expression made my chest tighten. They looked like victims dressed for sympathy, while I felt like the accused, exposed, raw, and already condemned. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. His voice was steady, deliberate, reminding us all that the law would decide what truth prevailed. Yet as the proceedings began, I quickly realized the law could be twisted just as easily as my family's love had been. My parents' lawyer painted a story of sacrifice and betrayal. He described years of financial support they had supposedly given me, fabricated loans, and gifts that he claimed I had squandered. He spoke of how I had taken advantage of them, how I had abandoned the very people who raised me once I no longer needed them. Each word pierced me like glass. And as the whispers spread through the courtroom benches, I felt smaller and smaller, like a child being scolded in front of strangers. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue as the lawyer described her heartbreak. My father sat stoically, the image of a man burdened by an ungrateful daughter. To anyone watching, it was convincing. Too convincing. I clenched my hands under the table, my nails digging crescents into my skin. I wanted to scream the truth, to remind them of the mortgage payments I had covered, the medical bills I had paid, the endless sacrifices I had made without hesitation. But my voice trembled with shame, and I knew emotion wouldn't save me. When it was my turn to speak, their lawyer objected to nearly everything I tried to present. Without hard evidence, my words were reduced to little more than desperate claims. And the humiliation of being cut off mid-sentence, silenced in front of strangers, was almost unbearable. For a moment, I thought they would win, that the narrative they had woven would strangle me before I had the chance to breathe. But then the judge asked a simple question. Do you have any documentation to support your claims? My heart pounded. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I reached into my folder and pulled out the paper I had guarded so carefully, the one piece of truth they could not erase. My hands shook as I handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. The room seemed to grow quieter with each step, as though everyone sensed the shift that was about to happen. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to read. His eyes moved slowly across the page, then narrowed. He turned to the next sheet, and then the next. A hush fell over the courtroom. These documents, the judge said, his voice sharper now, show consistent bank transfers from the defendant. He looked at me briefly. To the plaintiffs. Substantial amounts, over several years, not the other way around. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. My parents' lawyer shifted uncomfortably, his carefully constructed story unraveling in an instant. But it wasn't just the transfers that mattered. On the final page was the note, my mother's handwritten acknowledgement thanking me for paying their overdue bills. The ink was undeniable. Her handwriting was recognizable. It was the kind of proof that couldn't be argued away. I watched my parents' faces pale. My mother's tissue fell to her lap as her hand froze. My father clenched his jaw, his mask of control cracking. They had come here to humiliate me publicly, to strip me of everything I had left. But instead, they were the ones being exposed. The judge leaned back, his tone grave. This is not consistent with the claims presented. In fact, it raises serious questions about the integrity of the plaintiff's testimony. My parents' lawyer stammered something about misunderstandings, about family arrangements that weren't properly documented. But his words fell flat. The evidence was too clear. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the weight of humiliation shift off my shoulders and land squarely where it belonged. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the parasite they had painted me to be. I was the one who had carried them, and they had twisted my sacrifices into accusations. The judge's expression hardened as he shuffled the papers again. These records suggest financial deception and potentially more. If these transfers were misrepresented in previous statements, tax filings, loan applications, there could be broader implications. That was the moment the energy in the room changed. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about family betrayal or bruised pride. It was about something larger, something criminal. Whispers spread through the benches, heads turning, eyes darting. My parents looked at each other, panic flashing across their faces. For years, they had relied on appearances, on manipulation, on twisting narratives to suit their needs. But this was different. This was the truth, documented and undeniable. I sat still, my heart pounding, but my face calm. I had carried shame into this courtroom, but now it was theirs to bear. The truth had finally found its voice, and it was louder than all their lies combined. The judge cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing through the room. Given the nature of this evidence, I am ordering an immediate review of related financial records. Court officers, please remain present. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and I saw uniformed figures step inside. Their presence was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The weight of authority filled the air, thick with anticipation. And in that charged silence, I knew. This was only the beginning. The moment the officers stepped into the courtroom, the air shifted. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. My parents froze in their seats. My mother's hands clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white, while my father's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. The judge's voice carried steady authority. In light of this evidence, law enforcement will be taking immediate action. These records suggest not only false testimony, but also potential financial crimes. Court security, please remain in place. I sat there, my heart hammering, but my body still. For so long, I had been the one humiliated, the one treated like nothing because I had nothing. But in that moment, I wasn't small. I wasn't invisible. I was the one holding the truth, and the truth was finally speaking for me. The officers moved closer to my parents. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the courtroom like a verdict already delivered. My mother whispered something frantically to my father, but he didn't respond. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the table as though staring hard enough could erase the evidence in front of him. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply breathed. For the first time in years, my breath felt full, as though my lungs had space again. The bailiff collected the remaining documents, and the judge adjourned the session, his final words clear. This case is no longer a matter of civil dispute. It is now a matter of criminal investigation. As the courtroom emptied, whispers followed me like a shadow. People who had once looked at me with pity or judgment now glanced at me with awe, even respect. My parents were escorted out by officers, their heads bowed. The very people who had humiliated me for being broke were now exposed as liars and frauds. I walked out of the courthouse alone, but not lonely. The sun hit my face, warm and blinding, and for the first time, I welcomed it. The weight I had carried for years, the shame, the humiliation, the endless need for approval, was gone. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had found my own. That evening, I sat in my small apartment and thought about everything that had led me here, the sacrifices I had made, the nights I had cried in silence, the years of being measured only by what I could give. It had been a painful road, but it had shaped me into someone stronger than I ever imagined. I realized then that justice wasn't just about the police storming into a courtroom. Justice was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my worth. And I had done that. If you've ever been in a place where people made you feel worthless, where they treated you like nothing because you couldn't give them what they wanted, know this: your value is not defined by money or approval or their shallow measures. Your worth has always been there. Sometimes it just takes one moment of courage to show it. And before I close, let me say this: if my story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And please leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or share your own story if you've ever felt invisible. I read every single one, and your words matter here. This was my journey from humiliation to truth, from being broken to being free. And if you take anything from it, let it be this: the truth will always find its way to the surface, no matter how hard others try to bury it.